Welcome back to Act 3 of Deconstructing Directing, Directing with Kindness. I'm Andrew Robler, the founder and archivist here, and in this act, we're unpacking directing with kindness, since kindness has practical benefits both for us and those around us. Scene 1 introduced us to the principle of reckless kindness, which means choosing to balance how we treat ourselves and others as both worthy of our positive regard and worthy of the risks of doing so. AKA, kindness first, period. The rest of Act 3 will be about applying that principle to a number of common issues we face as directors, and here in Scene 2, we're going to start by tackling one of the most emotionally loaded parts of directing: how we respond when we feel disrespected. Whether you're brand new to directing or have been at it for decades, chances are you've had a moment when something a collaborator said or did made your blood boil. You may have thought, how dare they? Don't they know that I'm the director? To build rehearsal rooms that are kinder, more equitable, and more effective, we need to reframe those defensive feelings. The goal of this scene is not to teach you how to demand respect, rather to help you stay rooted in your vision and integrity as a leader without letting anger or defensiveness get in the way. As always, let's start by getting specific. What do we actually mean when we say that someone is being disrespectful? The obvious behaviors are easy to recognize: being talked over, getting overly defensive about a note, being openly argumentative. Sometimes it's more subtle. A designer doesn't follow through on our notes. An actor rolls their eyes during feedback. A producer cuts us off in a meeting. Students complain about us after we leave the room. It is reasonable to feel hurt or angry about these things. However, not everything that feels disrespectful is intended to be disrespectful. Our first instinct might be to lash out, shut down, or ignore the behavior. These things must be addressed because they will lead to a dip in morale, but the way we do it is important in order to maintain our status as a positive and effective leader. If you've watched, listened to, or read Act 2, especially Scene 7, Taking Care of Ourselves, you'll remember we talked about our nervous system's fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses to a perceived threat. When we feel disrespected as a director, that is often internalized. Our social standing feels threatened, and suddenly our brain is screaming danger, even if the moment is actually pretty small. This is even more amplified if we are a person of color, have been marginalized due to gender, disability, queerness, or carry trauma, anxiety, or history of being ignored or dismissed. The baggage we carry into the rehearsal room will directly affect how we feel and respond to those behaviors. So if you feel disrespected, it just means you have a normal nervous system response. Your brain deserves compassion, not punishment, because our history and our identity shape how we interpret behavior. So, if you've spent years walking through that reality, when someone cuts you off, dismisses your idea, or undermines you in rehearsal, it might hit differently. That feeling might not just be about this moment. It might be touching every moment that's ever made you feel invisible or unsafe. So let's be clear. If you feel disrespected, your body and your mind are telling you something. But instead of letting our nervous system react automatically, we can pause, get curious about what's really happening, and choose our next move with intention. In Act 1, Scene 2, we talked about facilitation skills as a director, and the first two skills in particular are ones we reference a lot: specificity and curiosity. We've gotten specific about why feeling disrespected is so challenging, and now we need to talk about the importance of curiosity in how we handle it. When we respond to disrespect with curiosity instead of control, something powerful happens. We stay grounded, we gather information, and we protect our peace. This doesn't mean being passive or pretending everything's okay. It means asking questions of ourselves, internally, and others, externally, before we react. As we explored in Act 2, Scene 7, we don't always recognize when we're feeling disrespected or threatened, so paying attention to physiological signs like our heart rate and tension in our muscles and joints, like jaw clenching, tight shoulders, etc., is helpful. If we can recognize it sooner, we can jump in with these questions before we spiral too far. Here are a few internal questions I use. What else could be going on here? Is this a pattern or a one-time thing? Am I being disrespected, or is my imposter syndrome flaring up? Have I made my needs clear, or am I assuming that others know what I need? Now, these internal questions are a great start, but the real magic starts to happen when we can engage. Now, these internal questions are a great start, but the real magic starts to happen when we can engage with those whose actions led to us feeling disrespected. Here are some examples of how we might frame questions with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Hey, I've noticed you've come late a few times this week. Is everything okay? Hey, you had a strong reaction to that blocking. Can you tell me more about what's coming up for you? I don't know if you realized, but you interrupted me a few times during that meeting. Can we talk about how to make sure everyone's voice gets heard? These are not always easy conversations, to be fair, especially because many of us have been taught that confrontation is to be avoided, and it's easy to think that any sort of question will be perceived as confrontation. But the reality is that curiosity de-escalates where defensiveness inflames, and it often uncovers needs or misunderstandings that otherwise go unspoken. Remember that the number one cause of resentment is assumptions and expectations that are not met. Staying curious, even when we start to feel our nervous system defenses activating, isn't only good for those we are talking to, but it helps to remind ourselves that maybe we don't need to slip into that fight and flight mode quite so quickly. As we talked about in Scene 1, kindness is a balancing act. We have to constantly work to balance our kindness toward others with kindness to ourselves. Kindness does not mean rolling over. It does not mean tolerating mistreatment. And it absolutely does not mean sacrificing your needs so that others stay comfortable. One of the core principles anchoring this act is that kindness is the choice to treat both ourselves and others as worthy of our positive regard. And positive regard means assuming good intentions on the part of others until their behavior shows us otherwise. Positive regard includes the choice to believe that our being specific in our needs and boundaries is something those around us want. So, what is a boundary? A boundary is a statement of what you will and won't accept, and what you'll do if it's crossed. It doesn't need to be dramatic, but it does need to be specific, and the consequences need to be based entirely on choices you can control. For example, if you bump me with your shoulder again, I will no longer be willing to sit by you. Now, this is often confused with an ultimatum, which is about a consequence that will be imposed on the other person if their behavior is not changed, such as, if you bump me with your shoulder again, you will no longer be permitted to sit near me. The former expresses what I will do if you continue with your action, while the latter expresses what I will do to you or have done to you if you do not change your behavior. This is often an expression of coercive power, which is something we often see modeled in parenting and teaching based on authoritarian models. We talk more about coercive power in Act 2, Scene 6, if that is of interest. Alright, so we understand the importance of boundaries, but how exactly can we put those into actions to address behaviors we perceive as disrespectful, both to ourselves and to others? I like to think of it in 3 tiers: confirming awareness, setting boundaries, and separation. Tier 1, confirming awareness, is usually the first conversation we have with someone about behavior we perceive as disrespectful, and it's exactly what it sounds like, making sure that they are aware their behavior is coming across that way. Sometimes the person displaying the problematic behavior may not even realize that they are doing it. Other times, our perception may be the bigger issue, such as in the case of someone with a resting facial expression that may look upset or emotionless. In the first instance, simply bringing awareness to the issue can be enough. In the latter, giving them the opportunity to clarify that the behavior isn't meant in that way can reassure us of their intentions. Now, for all 3 tiers, scripts can be helpful in structuring our response, and one popular script is called the DESC script, DESC, which is an acronym for describing the observed behavior, inquiring about what they meant by it, suggesting an alternative behavior, and outlining the consequences if the behavior is not changed. I prefer to modify it slightly and use the E to mean inquire and or express, as sometimes it can be helpful to both ask what they meant and also share how we interpreted it. And the S to mean suggest and or solicit, as it can sometimes be helpful to ask them to help determine what a different behavior might look like. So the full script might sound something like this. Describe. I've noticed you've interrupted me in our last few meetings. Inquire/express. Did you realize that you've been doing that? It makes it hard for me to lead the conversation and make sure that everyone is being heard. Suggest/solicit. I need you to wait until I'm finished speaking before jumping in. Would you like some tools to use when you have something to say while others are speaking? And then finally, consequences. If it happens again, I'll pause the meeting until we can reset expectations. Now, at the first tier, when we're confirming awareness, D and E may be all that we need. Once the awareness is raised, if the behavior continues, that's when we shift to tier 2, setting boundaries. The consequence in this context is ideally a boundary rather than a punishment or ultimatum. We're still trying to assume the best intention possible under the principle of reckless kindness. Behavior change can be difficult for people, and assuming positive regard of ourselves and others means offering at least a second chance, except in cases of particularly harmful or abusive behavior. At Tier 2, another valuable tool can be to put the conversation in writing. Now, have the conversation face-to-face, but write a summary afterwards and send it to whoever was involved in the conversation so that they can correct any misunderstandings right away. We don't put it in writing because we're planning to escalate or because we want to call someone out. A paper trail creates shared memory. It prevents confusion. It shows that you've been specific, not vague, and if things do escalate later on, you've already built a record of clear, kind communication. We've got a worksheet below that includes sample language for those kinds of follow-ups, along with scripting prompts and boundary reflection tools if you'd like a little more support developing these conversations. Before we talk about Tier 3 conversations, let's walk through a few common moments that feel like disrespect and explore how a model like DESC can help us respond with reckless kindness. Scenario 1. An actor is openly undermining our choices in rehearsal. We give a note. They roll their eyes. They whisper to a friend, and we feel dismissed. First, we take a breath. Is this behavior new or ongoing? If new, or this is the first time you're addressing it, check in privately, starting by describing the situation and asking for a conversation. An important thing to note about these descriptions: it's important to describe the behavior, not the intention. In this example, it might be tempting to say, "Hey, I saw that you hated my notes so much that you decided to gossip with Steve about it under your breath." Now, this statement has two really problematic assumptions. One, we assume that because of the behavior we witnessed, the eye roll, whispering to a friend, etc., that the point of the behavior was to express hatred of the note. And two, that their discussion amounted to gossip, which has an inherently negative connotation. These assumptions can lead to resentment and more defensiveness, which isn't helpful for anyone involved. Instead, focusing on the observable behavior keeps it out of the realm of assumptions. That might sound like this. "Hey, it looked like you rolled your eyes after I gave a note, and I noticed that you and Steven were whispering about it as I was giving notes to the other actors." Once we've described what we see, then curiosity comes into play. Asking an open-ended question and assuming the best when doing so, remember, we're assuming that this is the first time you've addressed this behavior, will go a long way. This might sound like, "Did you have concerns about the note that I gave?" This engages them in conversation and gives you a chance to express your concerns about the behavior in a way that acknowledges any concerns they have. Scenario 2. A designer presents something very different from what you've discussed. The default assumption is often that they ignored you and your wishes, which easily leads to resentment. Instead, try, "Oh, this is a different direction than I expected. Can you walk me through your thought process?" Sometimes they've solved a problem you didn't see, or sometimes, yes, they just went rogue. But asking first helps you respond more thoughtfully either way. Scenario 3. A producer speaks over you in a meeting. Now, this is tricky, especially when power dynamics are involved. If it feels safe, address it in the moment. Hey, I'd like to finish my thought before we move on. Or after the fact, it might sound like, I'm noticing a pattern where I'm being spoken over. That's not sustainable for me. Can we agree to give each other the space to finish speaking? Most of the time, I won't jump straight into consequences, instead focusing on describing, expressing, and inquiring, and maybe even suggesting or soliciting steps to move forward together. But in more serious situations, or when the behavior has been repeated, then it's often time to express a boundary. Remember that boundaries are about us and us alone. Telling someone you will not do that again or else there will be consequences is a use of coercive power that can have a chilling effect on a working relationship. Remember, check out Act 2, Scene 6 for a full breakdown of the types of power we deal with as directors. Instead, focus on what you can do. If the interruptions keep happening, I will need to stop the meeting in the moment until we can reset expectations. Now, after saying all of this, the reality is that sometimes it's not just a misunderstanding. Sometimes we're dealing with someone who genuinely doesn't respect us or our role. And in those moments, we still have options. We can address it head on. We can document it. We can loop in leadership or HR or our producer. But reckless kindness in this context means doing so with our dignity intact, not because we need to win, but because we need to protect the process. It means staying grounded in our values even when we're angry and refusing to replicate the same harm we've received. This brings us to Tier 3, separation. One of the hardest things we often have to navigate as directors is that, at times, the best thing for the process or production is to part ways with one or more of our collaborators. If we've been curious and addressed problematic behavior and it's still happening, or if it's clear that someone is acting in bad faith or with malicious intent, sometimes the relationship is not repairable, especially in the limited time of a typical production. Loss of faith and trust can happen quickly and take much longer to repair. Note that, in my experience, it feels easier to have Tier 3 conversations when the disrespect isn't directed at us, but at other members of the company. I've had multiple shows where I've had to dismiss actors due to conflict between them and other actors. It still doesn't feel great, but it's sometimes easier to stand up for others than to stand up for ourselves, especially if we are struggling with imposter syndrome to begin with. Now, the vast majority of the time we have a Tier 3 conversation, it's important that it not be the first time that they're hearing from us about these concerns. Ideally, we've used the DESC script at least once to share our concerns and clearly lay out shifts in behavior that we are requesting. It's also important that we don't have these conversations alone with someone, but that there's always someone else in the room, be that a producer, assistant director, or stage manager. In rare instances, if we have to have this conversation over the phone, via Zoom, or worst of all, via email, making sure that it's being recorded is important to protect ourselves and the other person. We'll talk more about the rare instance of having separation conversations more in a later act. Feeling disrespected is painful. It's emotional. It makes us want to fight, freeze, or flee. But every moment of friction is also a moment of choice. We can meet it with defensiveness or with curiosity. Remember, reckless kindness doesn't mean being naive. It means being brave enough to slow down, get curious, and stay aligned with our deepest values, even when things get messy. And if you need a little help putting this into practice, don't forget to download the worksheets that we've linked below. They'll help you identify common triggers, practice your language, and develop boundary statements that reflect your style and values. My values are what drive me to create this content and offer it completely free. But if you find it helpful and are able to support it financially, please consider joining our Patreon, which will allow you to set up a small monthly donation and earn fun perks. But again, none of this content will ever live behind a paywall, so if you can't or don't want to join the Patreon, don't worry. You'll still get all of Deconstructing Directing completely free. I'll see you again when you're ready for Scene 3. Until then, let's be recklessly kind, especially when it's hardest.